The high plains of Oklahoma stretch endlessly beneath a sky pale and unforgiving. Dust devils twist in the distance, rising like gray specters over cracked earth, carrying with them the scent of heat, toil, and despair. Miles of barren fields separate one homestead from the next. Towns are whispers on the wind, and strangers are rarer than rain. It is 1934, and life here demands more than strength. It demands endurance, stubbornness, and a willingness to face emptiness that can crush the soul. If you found your way here, you already know the truth lives in the shadows. Welcome to Underbelly Bloodline, where history bleeds and the past never stays buried. Subscribe, if you dare, and step deeper into the dark. Among these windswept plains stands a weathered wooden house, leaning against time and tempest alike. Its boards are gray, warped, and cracked, windows clouded with dust, roof sagging under the memory of countless storms. The land surrounding it is sparse, save for the remnants of crops that refuse to grow and the footprints of animals that struggle to survive in the parched soil. This is a place where hope is fragile, and even small successes are hard-won and quickly eroded by the relentless wind. From the horizon, a figure approaches. Boots sink into the powdery soil with each step, her coat flapping against the dry air. She carries a journal, edges worn, the leather softened by years of handling, ink faded but still legible. Her hair is pinned neatly, her eyes sharp, scanning the landscape with a mixture of resolve and apprehension. She is the matriarch, a woman who has come to this land with hope in her heart, unaware of the cycles she will witness, powerless to stop the patterns that will soon consume her family. She pauses at the threshold of the homestead, hand resting on the weathered railing, taking in the dust-streaked horizon and the hollow silence that stretches for miles. Her journal opens slowly, and she begins to write, capturing not only the rhythms of survival, but the flickers of fear she cannot yet name. The wind whips around her, scattering dust at her feet, and in that moment, the house and the plains seem suspended, fragile, isolated, waiting for the story to unfold. This is the beginning, the first breath of a family story carved into dust and time, and the matriarch stands at its center, witness and chronicler alike, as the high plains stretch endlessly behind her, indifferent and eternal. The wind never ceases on the high plains. It sweeps across the homestead, carrying grit into the cracks of every board, biting at the skin and lungs alike. Dust storms rise like gray specters over the horizon, swallowing the sun and turning the world into a blur of sand and shadow. Children run through this haze, their laughter fragile against the roar of the wind, tiny figures dancing like ghosts across the barren fields. Their hands are blackened with soil, their feet bare against the cracked earth, yet they move with a resilience born not of joy, but of necessity. Survival is their first game, and play is little more than imitation of labor. The house, once a sanctuary, now groans under the weight of time and tempest. Roof beams sag, Windows are smeared with dust so thick it blurs the outside world, and floorboards crack under every cautious step. Yet, within these walls, life persists. Meals are sparse, but shared. Conversations are short, but loaded with memory and instruction. And while the world outside is empty, inside, bonds grow tight, intense, almost suffocating. Isolation shapes the children as much as the dust. Towns are but distant whispers, a day's ride away, and strangers rarely come to these fields. The family leans inward, cousins, aunts, uncles, all drawn together in routines of labor, survival, and the subtle pull of familiarity. The matriarch watches quietly, her sharp eyes noting the small gestures of attachment that could become patterns, the ease with which closeness turns inward, circling only those she knows in the evenings. She writes by candlelight, her journal her only confidant. We are our own world now. Is this safe? She asks, the words trembling with an intuition she cannot yet name. Every scribble feels like a warning whispered into the dust, a plea against a future she cannot yet see. Hands plant seeds in the hard, cracked soil, corn, beans, the stubborn grains of survival. They grow slowly, battered by wind and drought, yet cling to life with stubborn insistence. In this barren land, patterns repeat. The cycle of closeness, necessity, and isolation begins to twist quietly into something heavier, more permanent. Cousins play together, work together, and slowly, unknowingly, they begin to entwine lives that should have remained separate. The sun sets behind the plains, casting long, haunted shadows across the homestead. The matriarch stands at the threshold, watching her children chase dust and sunlight, her heart heavy with hope and dread. Outside, the wind carries away her whispered fears, scattering them across the empty land. Inside, the seeds of solitude have taken root, and the family's inward spiral begins quietly, almost unnoticed, like a storm gathering beyond the horizon. The wind has grown crueler. Dust sweeps across the high plains in waves, stripping the earth bare and leaving behind the skeletal remains of what little once grew. Fields that promised sustenance now crack like parched skin, their soil light and brittle, unable to hold the seeds planted with trembling hands. Livestock wander aimlessly, gaunt and hollow-eyed, collapsing into the dust as if surrendering to a slow, inevitable decay. Every breath carries grit. Every step kicks up the endless gray that creeps into every corner of the homestead. Inside, the house feels alive with silence. Dust coats the floorboards, the furniture, even the faces of those who move through it. Children cough softly, the sound fragile but persistent, echoing against walls that seem to close in with each passing day. The elderly sit in corners, staring through the haze, their eyes hollow windows into the relentless passing of time and suffering. Each tick of the clock marks not only another day, but another step towards something the matriarch can sense but cannot yet name. Isolation has become more than geography. It is a living, pressing force that twists the family inward. Patterns begin to repeat, subtle at first, unnoticed by the world beyond the plains. Cousins grow close in ways that should not be, their bonds cemented by the crushing absence of anyone else. Traits once rare begin surfacing in quiet, troubling ways. A nervous twitch, a hesitation, a gaze too long or too empty. The matriarch watches these small signs like a doctor observing a fever, her heart tightening with each quiet observation. Her journal becomes a repository for fear. The wind takes more than the soil, she writes, her handwriting trembling with a weight she can scarcely bear. It takes the light from their eyes, and I fear what they will become. Each entry is a whispered warning, yet the world outside does not heed her. And in the confines of the homestead, the children are already carrying the shadows of what isolation has wrought, not just in mind or body, but in the repeating threads of a cycle that will bind them together in ways that cannot be undone. Night falls over the plains, and the wind howls through cracks and broken windows. The matriarch moves from room to room, observing, counting, and fearing. She sees in the faces of the children both the innocence of youth and the echo of decay, subtle deformities, fragile minds, and the whisper of inherited misfortune. Outside, the dust swirls endlessly, a gray ocean consuming the horizon, while inside, a family begins to unravel quietly, inexorably, under the weight of isolation, poverty, and the relentless march of the Dust Bowl. The house feels smaller now, though its walls have not moved. Time has thickened here, pressing heavy on the homestead, and the air is damp with unspoken tension. Old photographs hang crooked on dust-streaked walls, black and white faces frozen in smiles that never reach their eyes. The sepia tones of memory blur the line between past and present, as if the home itself remembers every sigh, every whispered argument, every longing glance between cousins who have grown too close, too quickly. Inside, gatherings are no longer simple celebrations of life. Meals are taken in silence, voices soft and tentative, laughter rare and brittle. The matriarch observes quietly, her sharp eyes tracing familiar patterns she has seen before in fleeting gestures, subtle touches, lingering gazes. She watches her children fall into the same embrace of closeness that has, unknowingly, been waiting to consume them. Cousins marry cousins, one union after another, and the house becomes a closed loop, spinning inward on itself, small and suffocating, a prison of blood and familiarity. She sits at the corner of the worn table, candlelight flickering across the pages of her journal, the shadows of her own face merging with the darkness in the room. Her hand trembles as she writes, words hurried but precise, desperate to leave a record for some future that may never come. They do not know the trap that waits. We are spiraling inward, a circle that will bind them long after I am gone. I fear the chains of blood will grow stronger with each generation. Outside, the wind rises again, rattling shutters and stirring the dust that never settles. Its howl seems to echo the dread in her chest, the quiet horror of a cycle repeating unnoticed. Every glance, every smile, every new life that comes into the house carries the weight of inevitability. The matriarch's eyes linger on her children, noting the subtle ways the bloodline folds back on itself. Traits repeated, habits mirrored, the quiet shaping of minds and bodies by both love and necessity. She knows the future is already taking root, like the stubborn weeds in the cracked soil outside. She knows that the homestead, once a place of hope, is now a closed garden of inherited fate. And as the candle sputters low and the shadows stretch long across the walls, she whispers into the dust, a warning, a plea, a prayer. Do not follow the path we are carving here before it is too late. The first cycle has begun, and with it, a quiet, inexorable descent, one that will bind the family together in ways neither they nor the wind-blasted plains can undo. The wind does not merely sweep across the plains anymore. It has found its way inside. Dust creeps under doors, settling on tables, floorboards, and the edges of worn furniture, a gray tide that softens the edges of the house and blurs the distinction between inside and out. Shadows deepen in corners, and the air is thick with the smell of dry earth, sweat, and unspoken tension. The homestead, once a sanctuary, has become a chamber of quiet unrest. Voices rise and fall in murmurs, brief flashes of anger or despair punctuating the monotony of isolation. Siblings argue over scraps of food, over chores, over the invisible weight pressing down on every decision. Cousins who once played together now meet in hushed confrontations, their closeness now tinged with resentment. In other rooms, children retreat into silence, curling against the dust-streaked walls, their eyes vacant but alert, watching the storms of emotion swirl around them. Every small conflict, every whispered grievance, feels magnified here, pressed into the walls like fingerprints in gray ash. The matriarch moves through the house like a ghost, her presence felt more than heard. She tries to smooth tempers, offer guidance, intercede in minor disputes, but her words fall flat, swallowed by the weight of generational patterns she cannot break. She sees the same cycles repeating, subtle yet unmistakable. Quarrels that mirror arguments she witnessed decades ago. Gestures of stubbornness that echo across bloodlines. The quiet inheritance of habits that will bind them long after she is gone. Her journal rests open on a table, pages ruffled and dust-streaked, waiting for the words she can no longer keep to herself. The walls hold more than our voices now, she writes, her hand shaking. They hold our fear, our silence, our stubborn refusal to escape what we have made. I am powerless to change them, only to witness the repetition of what I dread most. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters, whistling through broken panes. Inside, the dust moves with it, curling into the corners like living shadows. Every glance, every sigh, every unspoken resentment feels like a storm within the walls, mirroring the storms that rage endlessly outside. The family turns inward, sealed off from the world beyond the plains, and the matriarch, once a hopeful anchor, finds herself adrift in her own home. She watches, helpless, as the cycle repeats, a slow, relentless erosion of connection, love, and the fragile bonds that once held them together. In this house, dust is not merely soil. Dust is memory, regret, and the quiet, unyielding weight of a family unraveling from the inside. The house no longer hums with the tentative energy of youth. It is a vessel of repetition, echoing the lives that have been shaped by isolation and dust. Children born of the first cycle are now grown, their movements measured, their expressions quiet, almost careful. Faces bear subtle marks of the bloodline, slight distortions in bone, eyes that linger too long or dart too quickly, features that whisper of inherited strain. They move through the homestead as if it is both cradle and cage, carrying rituals unchanged across decades, sweeping the floor with worn brooms, tending to the same stubborn garden patches, cooking over the same blackened stove. Nothing alters, yet everything is weighted with the echoes of choices made long before they were born. The matriarch watches silently, her eyes tracing the familiar patterns of a life that has twisted into something she once feared. The children of her children mirror the gestures, the stubborn habits, the quiet obsessions of the generations before them. She sees it in the way hands fidget, in the cautious glances exchanged between cousins who should be strangers, in the subtle hierarchies that have grown within the closed walls of the homestead. Isolation has become tangible here, pressing down on the family like the relentless sun on the cracked plains outside. Her journal lies open each night, candlelight flickering across pages that have grown heavier with despair. I have lived to see what I feared most, and it has come to pass, she writes, the words sinking into the paper like stones into soil. Each entry carries the weight of observation and helplessness, a record of a family trapped in cycles they cannot perceive, cycles that bind them to the past as surely as the dust binds to the floorboards. Outside, the wind moves over the plains in ghostly waves, but it is the silence inside the house that carries the heaviest toll. Conversations are sparse, smiles are fleeting, laughter is brittle and quickly stifled. The air is thick with the inheritance of both blood and solitude, a palpable tension that presses into every corner, every glance, every footstep. And yet, through it all, the matriarch remains, the solitary witness to a lineage consumed by repetition, the keeper of warnings that may never be read. She moves among them quietly, her presence a faint tether to what the family once might have been. But the echoes are relentless, resounding through the generations like a mournful bell that cannot be silenced, carrying the past forward into a future she can only watch, powerless, as it unfolds. The candle flickers, casting long, shivering shadows across the room, as if the walls themselves are leaning closer to hear the words being written. Dust drifts lazily through the air, settling on every surface, a gray shroud that softens edges and blurs the line between past and present. The matriarch sits hunched over her journal, frail hands trembling slightly as they trace the ink across pages worn thin by time and worry. Each word she writes feels heavy, as though the weight of generations presses upon her pen, demanding it record what she cannot say aloud. Her eyes are sharp, though tired, scanning the room even as she writes. Outside, the wind moans across the plains, rattling shutters and raising small clouds of dust that drift in through the cracks. Inside, the silence is absolute but for the scratching of her pen, the soft sigh of paper turning, and the faint coughs of the house itself, settling into the long night. She writes slowly, deliberately, knowing these words may be the only lifeline to the future, a map out of the labyrinth her family has become trapped within. "Leave this place," she whispers under her breath, the words a prayer, a command, a desperate plea. "Find others. Do not make our mistakes." The letters seem to fade almost as quickly as they are written, the edges of the ink dissolving into dust that clings to the page like memories unwilling to let go. Every entry carries both hope and sorrow, a duality that rests uneasily in the chest, a rhythm of warning and lament. She pauses often, her hands hovering over the page, eyes distant, watching her children and grandchildren moving through the homestead. Faces quiet, expressions unknowable, routines repeating without reflection. She sees the patterns as clearly as if etched into their very bones. The same gestures, the same stubborn habits, the same inward turn of spirit. She cannot intervene. She cannot change the cycle. All she can do is record it, leaving fragments of guidance in the hope they will be found when the house is empty, when the wind has finally carried away all other voices. Night deepens, shadows thickening around her, the candle sputtering low. The journal closes with a final whisper: "Do not stay. Do not linger. Live elsewhere. And remember, the dust will claim those who remain." Her hands, trembling, fold the journal carefully, and for a moment, the house seems to hold its breath. Outside, the wind swirls, carrying the scent of dust and memory across the endless plains, as if the land itself remembers her warning, a solitary voice echoing through the hollow corridors of time. The house trembles with tension, though the boards and beams remain unchanged. The eldest child now carries the weight of the homestead on their shoulders, a fragile authority forged by years of labor, hardship, and the constant presence of dust that settles in every corner. Yet authority here is a fragile thing, a veneer over exhaustion, resentment, and the invisible chains of a family trapped in its own history. Minor disputes flare like sparks across dry tinder. A spilled cup of water becomes a shouted accusation. An unkempt corner of the house ignites a week-long argument. Hands once tender now strike in frustration. Voices raise then crack under the strain, and fleeting moments of connection, a smile, a brief laugh, a touch on the shoulder, vanish as quickly as they appear. Love is a fragile ember here, always smothered beneath the oppressive weight of repetition and inherited strain. The matriarch watches from the shadows, her eyes tracing every gesture, every flicker of emotion. She sees the patterns she once feared now unfolding with precision, as if time itself is bending to repeat the mistakes she tried so desperately to prevent. Cousins quarrel as their parents once did. Siblings raise their voices in ways she recognizes too well. The same minor jealousies, the same unspoken rivalries, the same flickers of cruelty and withdrawal. All of it spiraling under the invisible, unyielding pressure of isolation and poverty. Her journal lies open nearby, ink dark against the brittle pages, capturing both the violence and the silence. The walls cannot contain the storm within them, she writes, her hand trembling, and neither can I. I warn them. I whispered into the dust, but the cycle refuses to break. Every small kindness is swallowed, every hope undone, and the echoes of the past grow louder each day. Outside, the wind howls through broken windows, a constant accompaniment to the turmoil inside. Dust stirs in lazy clouds, drifting across the floor, settling on overturned chairs and scuffed floors, a silent witness to the eruption of tempers and the quiet despair that follows. The house, the family, the land itself, all bear the mark of endurance twisted into strain. And yet, even in these moments of despair, brief glimpses of tenderness flicker like fragile candles. A hand held too long, a whispered apology, a glance that softens for a heartbeat, only to be immediately undercut by the next quarrel, the next sigh, the next repetition of the patterns that have held this family captive for generations. The breaking points are not singular. They are continuous, a slow, unrelenting unraveling, and the matriarch can only watch, powerless, as her warnings dissolve like dust in the endless wind. The wind carries a hollow sound now, whistling through broken windows and rattling the bones of a house that has aged alongside its inhabitants. The boards groan under the weight of years, the roof sags, and the walls bear the gray stains of dust and neglect. Outside, the plains stretch endless and unforgiving, a sea of cracked earth and shifting wind, and the horizon trembles beneath approaching dust storms. Within this decaying homestead, the matriarch moves slowly, her steps measured, her breath shallow but steady, the last living thread of a family consumed by its own cycles. Time has etched lines into her face and silver into her hair, yet her eyes remain sharp, witnesses to decades of repetition, despair, and quiet horrors. She is untouched by the genetic strains that have twisted so many before her. She alone carries clarity in a house filled with shadows, a lone observer in a lineage now lost to the inevitability of isolation. She walks through empty rooms, pausing to trace the grooves in the floorboards, the marks left by restless hands, the silent testimonies of laughter and quarrels now long gone. Her journals lie in neat stacks, their pages worn and dust-streaked, each entry a warning, a plea, a desperate attempt to reach beyond the walls of her confinement. She kneels in the soil outside, the earth cracked and gray beneath her fingers, and begins to bury them one by one. Each journal is a lifeline to a future she may never witness, a path away from the dust, the isolation, and the repeating cycles of blood that have ensnared her family for generations. Do not stay, she whispers into the wind, voice almost swallowed by the approaching storm. Leave this place. Live elsewhere. Remember the lessons we could not learn in time. Her words scatter on the breeze, mingling with the fine dust that clings to everything it touches, as if the land itself is carrying her warnings across the plains. She pauses, rising slowly, and gazes across the empty fields, her shadow stretching long and thin over the cracked earth. The house behind her groans and sighs. The dust swirls in restless eddies, and the storm looms closer, a gray tide rolling over the horizon. She is the last witness, alone and resolute, a sentinel guarding the memory of a family trapped in patterns they could not escape. And as the wind rises and the first grains of the storm lash at her face, her silent plea, buried beneath the soil, ink and dust mingled into eternity, waits for those who might yet heed it. The homestead stands silent, hollowed by time and wind. Its boards sag under decades of neglect, windows gape like dark eyes staring across the empty plains, and the roof sags as if weighed down by memory itself. Tumbleweeds roll lazily across the cracked earth, driven by a wind that carries with it the faint echo of voices long gone, whispers of laughter and argument, life and despair, all erased by isolation and dust. Faded family photographs rest on the porch, edges curled and yellowed, capturing smiles that once held hope, now frozen forever in sepia tones. The land stretches endlessly, a gray ocean of cracked soil and restless wind, the horizon blurring where earth meets sky. The story of the Dust Mother's family is etched here in the bones of the house, the imprint of footsteps long faded, the echoes of lives caught in repetition and solitude, generations trapped by distance, poverty, and the quiet pull of bloodlines that intertwine too tightly. A family consumed by isolation, each cycle building upon the last, leaving the matriarch as the last witness to a lineage undone. The wind stirs again, lifting dust in gentle spirals, carrying with it the remnants of journals she buried, pages filled with warnings, advice, and quiet pleas. She had begged them, in ink and whispers, to leave this place, to break the cycle, to live elsewhere. And now the storm carries her words across the plains, mingling with sand and silence, a message for those who might still listen. Do not follow us here. The homestead feels haunted, not by spirits, but by memory. The fragility of humanity exposed, the corrosive power of isolation, and the legacy of choices that linger long after those who made them are gone. Dust drifts into the corners of rooms, curls around the edges of furniture, and settles on the photographs, preserving them in gray stillness, a monument to what was, what is, and what might have been. And as the camera pulls back, wide over the empty plains, the wind rising in mournful chorus, the story lingers like a shadow. The past refuses to stay buried, and the lessons of the Dust Mother's family remain etched into the soil, the house, and the air itself. If you've wandered this far, the matriarch's voice whispers, barely audible over the wind. You know the past never stays buried. Subscribe to Underbelly Bloodline and step deeper into the dark.